This episode of 5 Things is brought to you by NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 financial system. NetSuite gives you visibility and control of your financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. Keep listening after the show to find out about NetSuite's special financing for 5 Things listeners.
Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and this is 5 Things You Need to Know Wednesday, the 14th of July, 2021. Today, International Non-Binary Peoples Day. Plus, will President Joe Biden take action to ease a blockade on Cuba, and more. Here are some of the top headlines. Senate Democrats reached an agreement Tuesday night on a $3.5 trillion budget plan. It would expand Medicare, fund climate change initiatives, and fill other parts of President Joe Biden's economic agenda that Democrats hope to pass on top of a bipartisan infrastructure bill. Democrats hope to pass the legislation through reconciliation, a process that would allow for just a simple majority in the evenly divided Senate. Pope Francis was seen leaving the hospital on Wednesday. That comes 10 days after going through surgery to remove half his colon. And please stop throwing your pet goldfish in lakes. That's the message from the Minnesota city of Burnsville, which warns they can get bigger than you think, adding pictures on social media for proof. The fish reintroduced to the environment are also considered an invasive species that can contribute to poor water quality. Happy International Non-Binary Peoples Day. About 1 in 4 American LGBTQ youths identify as non-binary. That's according to a study by the Trevor Project, which works on suicide prevention for young LGBTQ people. The project collected survey data between October and December of last year from almost 35,000 young LGBTQ people aged 13 to 24 across the U.S. The data was used to identify how non-binary youths express themselves and the impact identity has on their well-being. In addition to the 26% who said they were non-binary, another 20% said they were questioning if they were non-binary. And while non-binary identities have also been grouped with the term transgender, the Trevor Project's data shows that only 50% of youth who identified as non-binary also identified as transgender. Within the non-binary umbrella, the project found that 72% used the term non-binary to describe their gender identity, and other commonly used gender identity labels included queer, gender nonconforming, gender fluid, genderqueer, androgynous, and agender, among others. As for pronouns, 33% of non-binary youth reported using they/them pronouns only, while 3% and 2%, respectively, reported using he/him or she/her only. Many respondents said they use they/them pronouns in combination with those binary gender pronouns. The Trevor Project survey on LGBTQ youth mental health also found that those who reported that no one respected their pronouns were 2.5 times more likely to have attempted suicide in the past year, compared with those who had all or most of the people they know respect their pronouns. For more on the Trevor Project's data and its resources, you can head to thetrevorproject.org. At least one person has died during demonstrations in Cuba. Protests have shaken the island nation in recent days against the government, citing food shortages, high prices, and other grievances. And protests have flooded across the Cuban diaspora, including in South Florida. There's also been an increased police presence in Cuba's larger cities since major demonstrations on Sunday, and the protests have since appeared to cut out, as internet and cell phone data service continue to be disrupted as a possible attempt to block communications. But the protests were some of the biggest displays of anti-government sentiment seen in years in the tightly controlled country. Cuba faces a COVID-19 surge and its worst economic crisis in decades amid U.S. sanctions. It's the first major public discontent over economic hardship since 1994. Some protesters have called for a change to the current government, but leaders there have mostly blamed outside influences for sparking the wave on social media. It's not clear what the U.S. response to the situation will be, if anything. State Department spokesman Ned Price said Tuesday that the people of Cuba are showing bravery.
We continue to follow widespread, peaceful protests throughout Cuba as Cubans are calling for freedom and human rights. They are standing up to Cuba's authoritarian regime. Their basic needs are not being met, and they are understandably exhausted. We commend the people of Cuba for showing great bravery, the strength of their will, and the power of their voice. We remain deeply concerned by the Cuban government's, quote, call to combat, and by the images of violence that we have seen over the past 2 days. We call for calm and we condemn any violence against those protesting peacefully, and we equally call on the Cuban government to release anyone detained for peaceful protest. We call on Cuba's leaders to demonstrate restraint, to urge respect for the voice of the people by opening all means of communication, both online and offline.
Those comments echo those of others in the Biden administration siding with the Cuban people. But President Joe Biden has been vague about what actions he'll take. He has not taken steps to reverse the Trump administration's hard-line Cuba policy. That's despite campaign promises that he would lift sanctions, loosen travel restrictions, and ease limits on remittances. The Delta variant of COVID-19 is the dominant strain in the U.S., representing 57% of new cases, and in areas with relatively low vaccination rates, hospitals are getting flooded. That includes Springfield, Missouri, where the number of patients is rising and their ages are much lower. At Cox Health, a major healthcare system in the area, they've seen the average age drop 12 years since last winter's surge, and they often have severe disease, despite no underlying conditions. Huge chunks of young people in some parts of the country still are not vaccinated against COVID-19, an issue that keeps getting thrown into the political light. In Tennessee, the Department of Health will stop all adolescent vaccine outreach for all diseases, including COVID, amid pressure from Republican state lawmakers. Tennessee already has some of the lowest COVID-19 vaccination rates in the country, with just 43% of people at least partially vaccinated, compared with 55.6% of the country as a whole. Much of the South and parts of the Midwest lag behind. Mississippi is the least vaccinated, at 37% partially or fully vaccinated. That's compared with the nation's most covered, Vermont, at 75%. Cornel West is once again leaving Harvard University. In a resignation letter shared on social media, the activist and professor said his application for tenure was rejected. West wrote, quote, "We all know the mendacious reasons given had nothing to do with academic standards. When my committee recommended a tenure review, also rejected by the Harvard administration, I knew my academic achievements and student teaching meant far less than their political prejudices," unquote. West taught at Harvard's Law and Divinity Schools and in its Department of African and African American Studies. He's had a history of disagreeing with Harvard administrators. West was offered tenure in 1993 before leaving the university in 2002 after a public spat with then-President Lawrence Summers. West said Summers monitored his research, requested to examine his course records, and questioned the merit of his scholarship. But West later returned to Harvard in 2016. His resignation comes after the controversy we talked about on 5 Things, surrounding the University of North Carolina's rejection of Nikole Hannah-Jones' request for tenure. That decision was reversed, but Hannah-Jones declined. Britney Spears' conservatorship will again be thrown under the spotlight Wednesday with another court hearing. This one will focus on key issues, including whether or not her father, Jamie Spears, continues as a conservator, and whether the pop star can hire her own lawyer to represent her. It comes 3 weeks after a June 23rd hearing where Spears spoke publicly about the situation for the first time in court. She said in addition to her finances being in others' control, she was forced to take medication and use an intrauterine device for birth control, while also not being allowed to marry her boyfriend. Spears said, quote, "I just want my life back," unquote. Thanks for listening to 5 Things. You can find the show wherever you get your audio, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And please drop us a 5-star review if you have a chance. Thanks as always to Shannon Green and Claire Thornton for their work on the show. 5 Things is part of the USA Today Network.
Tackling your business's finance to-dos can be daunting enough without being slowed down by manual processes, integration difficulties, and glitchy delays. Now is the time to make the switch to NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 financial system, because NetSuite gives you visibility and control of your financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. It's everything you need, all in one place. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time, no matter how big your business grows. Don't let your competitors sprint ahead while you stay stuck trying to make sense of your books. Switch to NetSuite to get the control you need to thrive. And right now, special financing is back. NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind financing program only for those ready to switch today. Head to netsuite.com/5things right now. That's special financing at netsuite.com/5things. netsuite.com/5things.